You were there. You were a thinking, feeling, experiencing human being. You felt hunger and comfort and fear and warmth. You watched faces above you and heard voices you would come to love. You learned to roll, to sit, to stand, to walk. You acquired your first words, learned your first lessons, formed your earliest relationships, and you remember none of it. Not a single moment from the first 2 or 3 years of your life has survived into your conscious memory. And the reason why is one of the strangest and most counterintuitive discoveries in all of neuroscience. Because the problem isn't that nothing was recorded, the problem is almost the opposite. For decades, the dominant explanation for childhood amnesia, the term psychologists use for this universal inability to recall early life, was that infant brains were simply too undeveloped to form lasting memories. Babies, on this view, were passive receivers of experience, not yet capable of the kind of complex memory formation that would leave durable traces. This explanation was tidy, intuitive, and largely wrong. What researchers have discovered in the decades since is far stranger. Infant and toddler brains are not poor at forming memories. They are, in some respects, extraordinary at it. They are forming memories constantly, rapidly, at a rate that outpaces almost any other period of life. The reason those memories don't survive into adulthood has almost nothing to do with the quality of the recording and almost everything to do with what happens to the hardware on which they were recorded. Developmental psychologist Carolyn Rovi Collier spent decades designing ingenious experiments to probe infant memory, work that fundamentally changed how scientists understand what babies can remember. In her most famous paradigm, she attached a ribbon from a mobile above an infant's crib to the baby's ankle. The baby quickly learned that kicking moved the mobile. When brought back to the same mobile days or even weeks later, babies as young as 2 months old showed clear signs of remembering. They kicked faster and harder in the presence of the mobile than they did with an unfamiliar one. The memory was there. It was working. It was just operating in a system that would not survive. The key lies in a structure deep inside your brain called the hippocampus. This seahorse-shaped region is essential for the formation of episodic memories, the kind that connect experiences to specific times, places, and contexts. When you remember eating dinner last Thursday, or the name of the street you grew up on, or the moment you heard a particular piece of news, the hippocampus is the machinery that built and later retrieves those memories. And at birth, the hippocampus is profoundly immature. This is not unusual. Much of the brain takes years to reach functional maturity, but the hippocampus undergoes something particularly relevant to childhood amnesia, a process called neurogenesis. Throughout early childhood, the hippocampus is generating new neurons at a very high rate. This sounds like a good thing, and in many ways it is. New neurons mean a larger, more capable memory system being built in real time. But there is a cost. When new neurons integrate into the hippocampal network, they disrupt and overwrite the connections that encoded earlier memories. The very growth of the system erases its own archive. Neuroscientist Paul Franklin and his colleague Sheena Jocelyn at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto conducted research that demonstrated this mechanism directly. In studies using mice, which also show a form of childhood amnesia, they found that artificially slowing neurogenesis in infant mice allowed early memories to persist longer than they normally would. Conversely, artificially increasing neurogenesis in adult mice caused them to forget memories they had recently formed. The rate of new neuron production and the persistence of memory were directly linked. Growth was erasing the record. But neurogenesis alone doesn't fully explain the phenomenon. Because humans show childhood amnesia for memories formed well after the most intense period of hippocampal neurogenesis, typically up to age 3 or even beyond.
Language is part
Something
of the
else
answer.
is happening in
Many
parallel.
researchers,
Including psychologist Catherine Nelson, have argued that autobiographical memory, the kind of memory that tells the coherent story of your life, requires language to organize it. Before you have the verbal framework to label an experience, to embed it in narrative, to connect it to a self that persists across time, the experience remains unanchored. It is felt. It may even be encoded, but it cannot be retrieved in the way that language-organized memories can, because the retrieval system requires the same verbal scaffold that the encoding system lacked. When language arrives, it doesn't just give you words. It gives you the architecture for a story. And without a story, there is no narrator, and without a narrator, there is no coherent autobiographical self to whom memories belong. This is why the earliest memories most adults report are not from infancy, but from somewhere between age 2.5 and 3.5, the period when language has developed enough to begin organizing experience into narrative. Even those early memories are fragmentary, brief scenes, flashes of light and sensation, a face, a color, a feeling without context. The narrative apparatus was only beginning to assemble itself, and the memories it captured bear the marks of its immaturity.
Psychologist Mark Howe and others have argued that episodic memory requires a stable sense of self, a continuous I who did this, who was there, who experienced that, and that this self-concept only solidifies in the latter half of the second year of life. Before that, the brain is recording experiences, but there is no coherent self yet assembled to claim them as its own. The memories cannot be retrieved as mine because the concept of mine was not yet in place when they were formed. Cultural factors shape the boundary as well. Research by Chi Wang, a psychologist at Cornell University who has spent decades studying cross-cultural differences in autobiographical memory, found that the age of earliest memory differs measurably across cultures. Adults from Western cultures, particularly those where the self is emphasized as individual and narratives of personal experience are frequently rehearsed in childhood conversations with parents, tend to have slightly earliest memories than adults from cultures where collective identity is more prominent and where parents are less likely to co-construct personal narratives with their children. If you were raised in a family that frequently revisited and retold your early experiences, if you heard your mother say, "Remember when you fell off the swing?" those rehearsed memories have a higher chance of surviving. Memory, it turns out, is
striking
partly
about
a
childhood
social
amnesia is what it reveals about memory in general. The implicit assumption most of us carry is that memory is a recording, something that captures experience and stores it faithfully until we press play. But what the science of childhood amnesia shows is that memory is not a recording at all. It is a construction. It is an active, ongoing process of building and rebuilding neural connections, a process that is shaped by biology, by language, by culture, by the presence or absence of other people who help us rehearse and reconstruct our past. The experiences of your early childhood did not disappear without trace. They shaped you. The attachment bonds formed in those voiceless years left their mark on how you relate to people today. The fears and comforts of infancy laid down templates that still influence your nervous system. The love you received or failed to receive in years you cannot remember may be among the most consequential experiences of your entire life. You were there, every second of it. You just cannot remember being there. And the reason is not that your brain failed you. It is that your brain was building itself, and the construction process consumed its own earliest blueprints.